That dress looks like it came from a donation box, Olivia. Margaret Whitmore said it loudly enough for the whole terrace to hear, and for one clean second, every champagne glass stopped halfway to someone's mouth. Olivia Bennet Whitmore stood beneath the warm string lights of the Whitmore estate, wearing a simple navy dress she had bought 5 years earlier from a small shop in Vermont, the same dress Daniel once told her made her look peaceful. It had no designer label, no glittering stones sewn into the fabric, no dramatic cut meant to invite attention. It was modest, pressed, and clean, the kind of dress a woman chose when she knew exactly who she was and had no need to be announced by the price tag on her clothing. Behind her, parked near the long circular driveway between black SUVs and polished luxury sedans, sat her old silver Honda with 183,000 miles on it. Someone had already noticed. Someone always did. Vanessa Whitmore leaned toward her husband Bradley, and whispered something that made him cough into his fist to hide a laugh. Margaret smiled with the satisfied cruelty of a woman who believed elegance was measured by how many people she could make feel small in one room. Daniel, she continued, turning toward her son as if Olivia were not standing there. I keep telling you, your wife should let someone help her. This is my birthday dinner, not a community center clothing drive. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the guests, soft enough to sound civilized, sharp enough to cut. Daniel Whitmore's jaw tightened. He stepped closer to Olivia, his hand finding the small of her back, a quiet promise that he was there, that he had heard every word, that he was ready to answer for both of them. But Olivia touched his wrist gently before he could speak. Not here, her eyes told him. Not tonight. She did not lower her head. She did not apologize. She did not explain that the dress was chosen because Daniel loved it, or that the car still ran perfectly, or that the small brown paper package in her hands contained something far more personal than anything bought behind glass on Fifth Avenue. She simply walked to the gift table and placed it between a crystal vase and a silver box tied with imported ribbon. The paper was plain. The twine was simple. The card had been written by hand. Margaret looked at it as if Olivia had placed a grocery receipt among diamonds. How charming, she said. Still committed to the rustic theme, I see. Olivia smiled softly, the kind of smile that made people mistake restraint for weakness. Around her, the Whitmores shone with expensive watches, tailored jackets, smooth pearls, and laughter sharpened by privilege. They thought Olivia's simplicity was an embarrassment. They thought Daniel had married beneath him. They thought the old car, the modest dress, and the quiet woman beside him were proof that she had never truly belonged in their world. What none of them understood was that Olivia had stopped trying to belong to their world years ago. She and Daniel had built something quieter, stronger, and far more difficult to take away. And before that night ended, Margaret Whitmore would look at the plain brown paper gift she had mocked and realize, for the first time, that simplicity was not the absence of power. Sometimes it was where power had been hiding all along. The laughter did not end when Olivia stepped away from the gift table. It followed her across the terrace in small polished pieces, hidden behind crystal glasses and practiced smiles. At the Whitmore estate, cruelty never arrived dressed like anger. It came wearing pearls, cuff links, silk scarves, and the soft voice of someone asking a question meant to humiliate. Vanessa Whitmore was the first to drift closer, holding a glass of sparkling water with one hand and showing off a diamond bracelet with the other. Olivia, I have to ask, she said, tilting her head with fake curiosity. Is the simple look a statement, or do you genuinely not care how people see you? Bradley laughed under his breath before Olivia answered. Daniel moved as if he might step between them, but Olivia only touched his sleeve again. She had learned a long time ago that the Whitmores did not ask questions because they wanted truth. They asked because they wanted an audience. I care how I treat people, Olivia said gently. That usually tells me more than how they see me. Vanessa blinked, unsure whether she had been insulted, and Bradley looked away with a tight smile. Across the terrace, Margaret was accepting compliments near the marble fountain, glowing beneath the kind of attention she had spent her life collecting. The estate stretched behind her like proof of importance, 3 stories of white stone, Windows tall enough to make ordinary people feel small, a dining room large enough to seat 40, and a driveway curved around imported hedges trimmed into perfect obedience. Everything in the Whitmore family had a purpose, and that purpose was to be seen. Their clothes had to be recognized. Their vacations had to be photographed. Their donations had to be printed in programs. Their kindness had to have witnesses. Olivia had entered that world 7 years earlier and understood it within 1 month. They did not worship money exactly. They worshipped the reflection of themselves that money created. That was why her old leather purse bothered them. That was why her phone, 2 models behind Vanessa's, became a family joke. That was why Daniel's relatives acted offended by the fact that Olivia still wrote grocery lists by hand and repaired shoes instead of replacing them. To them, simplicity was not a preference. It was evidence of failure. But Olivia had never been careless with money. She knew where every dollar went. She knew which employees at Daniel's company had children in college, which retired groundskeepers still needed help with medical bills, which small-town library had almost closed before an anonymous grant saved it. She kept those details in the worn brown leather notebook tucked inside her purse, the same notebook Vanessa once called adorably old-fashioned. The pages were filled with names, numbers, dates, and promises. No one at the party knew that Daniel had read from that notebook more times than he had read from any board report. No one knew that he trusted Olivia's quiet columns more than his own family's loud opinions. As servers carried trays of hors d'oeuvres across the terrace, Margaret lifted her glass and announced dinner would begin soon. Guests turned toward the glowing French doors, still whispering about Olivia's plain gift, an old car. Olivia remained near the edge of the terrace for 1 moment, looking out at the expensive lawn rolling into the dark. Daniel stood beside her, his voice low. "I should have said something." Olivia looked at him and smiled, not wounded, not defeated, only tired in a way he understood. "You will," she said softly. "Just not tonight." Then she reached into her purse and pressed one hand against the leather notebook, feeling the weight of everything his family had never bothered to ask. Daniel Whitmore had stopped being embarrassed by Olivia long before his family ever tried to teach him how to be ashamed of her. In the beginning, they thought his patience was temporary, that sooner or later he would grow tired of her quiet habits, her plain clothes, her small house, and the way she measured comfort by peace instead of applause. Margaret had once told him, over breakfast in the sunroom, that love was easier when 2 people came from the same world. Daniel had looked across the table at his mother and said, "Maybe that is why I married someone who could show me a better one." Margaret had laughed then because she thought he was being romantic. She never understood he was being honest. Years before that birthday dinner, before the estate lights and polished insults, Daniel had seen Olivia clearly in a place his family would have considered forgettable. It was a rainy Tuesday evening at a small community center outside Hartford, where Daniel had gone to present a corporate donation on behalf of Whitmore Holdings. He arrived in a tailored suit, expecting photographs, handshakes, and a quick speech. Olivia was there in jeans, a gray sweater, and old sneakers, stacking folding chairs after a financial literacy class for single parents. She did not know who he was. She did not care what his last name meant. When one of the organizers thanked Daniel for the donation, Olivia smiled politely, then asked him whether the company intended to support the program for 1 night or for 5 years. Daniel had been so unused to that kind of question that he had no answer ready. Most people thanked the Whitmores. Olivia asked what the money was supposed to become after the cameras left. That was the first time Daniel realized she did not dislike wealth. She disliked waste dressed up as generosity. Their marriage had never looked impressive to people who needed impressive things. Their favorite restaurant was a family-owned diner 20 minutes from their house, where the waitress knew Daniel liked black coffee and Olivia always ordered soup when it rained. They spent Sunday afternoons walking through farmers' markets, not because they could not afford private chefs, but because Olivia liked knowing the names of the people who grew their food. At night, while Margaret attended charity galas with printed donor boards and photographers near the entrance, Olivia sat at the kitchen table with Daniel, reviewing scholarship applications, employee hardship requests, and small community projects that never made the society pages. Daniel would loosen his tie, lean back in the old wooden chair, and watch her turn pages in the brown leather notebook. "You know," he once said, "my family knows the price of every room in that estate, every bottle in the cellar, every painting on the wall." Olivia looked up from her notes. "And what do you know?" Daniel smiled sadly. "That most of them have no idea what anything is worth." That sentence stayed between them like a vow. It was why Daniel began bringing Olivia into conversations no one else knew were happening. It was why he trusted her with numbers, not because she wanted control, but because she respected responsibility. It was why, when his family mocked her old car and plain dress, he did not see a woman beneath the Whitmore name. He saw the only person strong enough not to be changed by it. Back on the terrace, as the guests moved inside for dinner, Daniel glanced at the brown paper gift on the table, and then at Olivia's hand resting over the notebook in her purse. He knew his mother believed Olivia had brought something small into that house. Daniel knew she had brought the one thing his family had lost years ago: judgment. The Whitmores had laughed at Olivia's house before they ever laughed at her dress. The first time Margaret saw it, she stood in the narrow front walkway with her sunglasses still on, staring at the small white Cape Cod as if Daniel had brought her to the wrong address. The house sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees, 30 minutes from the estate and a world away from its marble floors and gated driveway. It had a blue front door, a porch swing that creaked in the fall wind, and flower beds Olivia tended herself every spring. To Margaret, it looked like a place people escaped from, not a place a Whitmore heir chose to come home to. "Daniel," she had said that afternoon, keeping her voice low but not low enough, "you cannot be serious. This is charming for a weekend rental, but not for a man with your position." Vanessa had walked through the living room later and called it cozy, with the same tone people used when they meant small. Bradley had asked where Daniel planned to put a proper wine cellar, and when Daniel said they did not need one, Bradley looked at Olivia as if she had personally stolen ambition from the family bloodline. Olivia had poured coffee into plain white mugs and said nothing. She knew they saw the scratched oak table, the mismatched bookshelves, the second-hand lamp near the window, and the kitchen with cabinets that needed repainting. They did not see what Daniel saw. They did not see the evenings when rain tapped softly against the windows while Olivia and Daniel sat at that old kitchen table with papers spread between them. They did not see Daniel removing his expensive watch and setting it beside a stack of employee hardship forms because he wanted to remember that time was worth more than appearance. They did not see the night he slid a thick folder across the table toward Olivia and said, "This is not about money. This is about making sure money cannot become a weapon in the wrong hands." Inside that folder were early drafts of the Whitmore Legacy Trust, private voting agreements, letters of instruction, and documents that moved Daniel's personal shares into a structure designed to protect the company, its workers, and the community projects he and Olivia cared about. Olivia had read every page slowly. She asked questions Daniel's lawyers later admitted were better than half the questions they heard from board members. She wanted to know who could access the funds, who could misuse them, who could block support for families, who could sell company land, and who could turn Daniel's legacy into another social trophy. Daniel watched her underline clauses with a cheap blue pen from the junk drawer, and in that moment, he knew he had chosen correctly. The Whitmores thought the little house proved Olivia wanted less. The truth was, it was the only place where Daniel had been brave enough to plan for more than himself. That kitchen was where he signed the first authorization giving Olivia emergency decision rights if he could not act. That living room was where they argued late into the night about whether kindness needed legal protection from greed. That porch was where Daniel told her he trusted her more than anyone who shared his last name, because she had never once asked what she could take from it. Back at Margaret's birthday dinner, the family moved through the grand dining room beneath a chandelier that cost more than most people made in a year. Olivia took her assigned seat halfway down the table, far from Margaret, exactly where guests of lesser importance were always placed. Vanessa glanced at Olivia's purse resting beside her chair and smiled. "Did you bring that little notebook again?" she asked. "You really do love your antiques." Olivia placed her hand gently over the worn leather cover. For a moment, she thought of the old kitchen table, Daniel's signature, the blue pen, and the quiet promises no one in this room knew existed. Then she looked at Vanessa and said calmly, "Some old things hold more value than people realize." The sentence stayed with Vanessa longer than she wanted to admit. Some old things hold more value than people realize. She repeated it later to Bradley in a mocking whisper, but the words did not land as harmlessly as she hoped. They had carried a confidence that made the dining room feel colder for one brief moment, as if Olivia had opened a door no one else could see. Margaret noticed it too. She watched Olivia through the candlelight while the courses came and went, studying the calm way her daughter-in-law listened more than she spoke. That was the thing Margaret disliked most about Olivia. Not the dress, not the old car, not the plain purse. It was the fact that Olivia never seemed desperate to defend herself. People who needed approval could be managed. People who needed invitations could be controlled. But Olivia had never behaved like someone waiting to be accepted, and Margaret had begun to understand that ridicule only worked on people who believed the room had the right to judge them. By the following Saturday, Margaret had decided the lesson needed to be sharper. The Whitmore Foundation hosted a donor luncheon at the country club, the kind of event where women wore cream-colored suits and men laughed softly over expensive coffee, where every table had white roses and every guest knew which names mattered. Daniel had asked Olivia if she wanted to skip it, but she shook her head. "If your mother wants a stage," she said, fastening a simple pair of pearl earrings Daniel had given her on their first anniversary, "then let her have one." Olivia arrived with Daniel in the same silver Honda, because the weather was clear and the car still ran well. A valet opened the door and paused for half a second, just long enough for Vanessa to notice from the club entrance. "There she is," Vanessa said brightly as Olivia stepped out. "The only woman I know who can make a country club look like a church basement potluck." Bradley chuckled. Margaret did not laugh immediately. She waited until Olivia and Daniel reached the steps, then took Olivia by the arm in the soft, public way that looked affectionate from a distance. "Dear, I only say this because appearances matter here," Margaret murmured. "When people see Daniel's wife arrive like this, they wonder whether he has lost his judgment." Olivia looked down at Margaret's hand, then back at her face. "Do they wonder that?" she asked. "Or do you?" Margaret's smile tightened. During the luncheon, Margaret found her moment. She stood near the podium, thanking donors for their generosity, praising the Whitmore name, and speaking about responsibility with the polished ease of someone who had turned reputation into a second language. Then she looked directly at Olivia. "Our family believes in giving back," Margaret said. "Of course, some people prefer to live so simply that one might almost think they are asking to be pitied." A few guests shifted in their chairs. Vanessa lowered her eyes to hide a smile. Daniel's hand closed around his water glass, but Olivia placed her fingers lightly over his. She did not rise. She did not blush. She did not give Margaret the satisfaction of visible hurt. When the applause came, thin and uncertain, Olivia stood only after it faded. She picked up her small purse, walked toward the side table where pledge cards were being collected, and placed a sealed envelope beside the crystal bowl. Margaret's eyes followed it. "Another handmade note?" she asked sweetly. Olivia turned, her voice gentle but clear enough for the nearest tables to hear. "No. A correction." The room quieted. Olivia looked at the white roses, the monogrammed napkins, the perfect smiles, and all the people who had mistaken display for generosity. Then she said, "The people who need to look rich are usually the ones most afraid of being poor inside." No one laughed that time. Daniel looked at his wife with the quiet pride of a man who had always known the truth. Margaret stared at the envelope as if it had suddenly become heavier than paper. She did not know what was inside, but for the first time, she wondered whether Olivia's silence had never been weakness at all. It might have been patience. And patience, in the hands of a woman who kept records, could become something far more dangerous to a family built on appearances. 3 weeks after the country club luncheon, Daniel began leaving meetings early. At first, the Whitmores treated it like an inconvenience, something to be managed between board calls, foundation dinners, and the next photograph in the business journal. Margaret told people he was exhausted from carrying too much responsibility. Vanessa said the company had always taken more from him than it gave back. Bradley used the moment to suggest, very carefully, that perhaps the family needed a stronger voice in the executive office. Only Olivia knew how long Daniel had been hiding the truth from everyone else. She had seen him pause at the kitchen sink with one hand resting on the counter. She had watched him sit longer than usual in the old wooden chair after dinner, smiling at her as if he could cover pain with tenderness. When the doctor finally told him he needed to step away from daily work and focus on recovery, Daniel did not look frightened. He looked prepared. That evening, rain pressed softly against the windows of the little Cape Cod house while Olivia made tea and Daniel opened the bottom drawer of his desk. He pulled out a navy folder tied with a plain white string, then placed it on the kitchen table between them. Olivia recognized the folder before he said a word. It was the final version of everything they had built in quiet rooms while his family mocked the rooms themselves. "I hoped we would never need this soon," Daniel said. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of a man who had finally stopped pretending time was unlimited. Olivia sat across from him and folded her hands around the mug he had given her years ago from a farmer's market in Maine. "Then we will use it carefully," she said. Daniel smiled because that was why he had chosen her. Not because she wanted his name, or his money, or his place at the head of any table, but because she understood that power was most dangerous when it was treated like a prize. The next morning, Daniel notified the board of Whitmore Holdings that he was taking an indefinite medical leave. By noon, Margaret had called Olivia 6 times. By 2 o'clock, Vanessa had sent a message asking whether Olivia needed help understanding what came next. By dinner, Bradley had already spoken to 2 attorneys, assuming the family could move quickly before Olivia realized how little they believed she knew. Margaret arrived at the little house the following afternoon without calling first. She stood in the doorway wearing a camel coat and a concerned expression that did not reach her eyes. "Olivia," she said, glancing past her into the modest living room. "This is going to become complicated. Daniel built a life far beyond what you are used to managing. No one expects you to carry that burden." Olivia did not step aside. She held the door with one hand and looked at her mother-in-law calmly. "Daniel does." Margaret's mouth tightened. "Daniel is not thinking clearly right now." From behind Olivia, Daniel's voice came from the hallway, quiet but firm. "I have never thought more clearly in my life." Margaret looked past Olivia and saw her son standing with the navy folder under one arm. For the first time, he did not look like the boy she could guide back into obedience. He looked like a man who had already made his final decision. "The board meeting is Friday," Daniel said. "Olivia will be there with me." Margaret gave a small laugh, the kind meant to soften an insult before delivering it. "At a board meeting? Daniel, be reasonable." Daniel stepped closer to Olivia and placed the folder in her hands. "She knows more about the future of this family than anyone sitting at that table." Margaret stared at the folder as if it were an object taken from the wrong drawer. She still saw Olivia's old purse, old car, old notebook, and small house. She still believed simplicity meant helplessness. What she did not know was that Daniel had already signed the documents, filed the authorizations, and recorded the instructions that would decide everything. The woman Margaret wanted to remove had not been standing outside the Whitmore legacy. She had been protecting it from the inside. By Friday morning, the Whitmore Holdings boardroom looked exactly the way Margaret wanted the family to look: polished, expensive, and impossible to question. The long walnut table reflected the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, and every leather chair had been placed with the precision of a room built for control. Margaret sat near the head of the table in a cream suit, Vanessa beside her with a tablet already open, Bradley across from them with a folder thick enough to look important. They had arrived early because they believed possession of a room was the same thing as authority. When Olivia entered beside Daniel, the conversation stopped. She wore a charcoal dress, simple black heels, and the same old leather purse Vanessa had mocked at dinner. In her arms was the navy folder Daniel had given her, and inside her purse was the brown notebook that had outlasted every insult. Margaret looked from Olivia to Daniel with a smile meant for witnesses. "Daniel, sweetheart, you should be resting. Olivia can wait outside while we discuss the transition." Daniel pulled out a chair for his wife. "Olivia is not waiting outside." Bradley cleared his throat. "This is a corporate governance matter. With respect, Olivia has never served on the board." Before Daniel could answer, the door opened again and 3 people walked in: Helen Morris, Daniel's longtime attorney; Robert Keene, the chief financial officer of Whitmore Holdings; and a senior trust officer from Hanover First Bank named Patricia Caldwell. Margaret's smile faded by half an inch. Helen placed a stack of documents at the head of the table and looked around the room with the calm authority of someone who had not come to ask permission. "We are here to formalize Mr. Whitmore's medical leave and confirm the active authority structure already executed and filed." Vanessa glanced at Bradley. "Already executed?" Helen opened the first folder. "Yes. Over the past 18 months, Mr. Whitmore transferred his personal voting shares into the Whitmore Legacy Trust. The trust became active upon his written notice of medical leave, which was submitted on Tuesday morning." Margaret sat straighter. "That trust was supposed to preserve family interests." "It does," Helen said. "That is precisely why the controlling trustee is Mrs. Olivia Bennet Whitmore." The room went silent so completely that Olivia could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning above them. Vanessa's face changed first, confusion becoming disbelief, disbelief becoming offense. Bradley looked down at his own folder as if the right answer might be hiding between pages he had not written. Margaret did not look at Olivia. She looked at Daniel as though he had embarrassed her in public. "You gave her control of Whitmore voting shares?" Daniel's voice was quiet, but it carried to the end of the table. "I gave control to the person most capable of protecting them," Helen continued before Margaret could interrupt. "Mrs. Whitmore holds primary trustee authority over the Whitmore Legacy Trust. She controls the voting direction attached to Daniel Whitmore's shares, approval of extraordinary family distributions, oversight of charitable commitments, and review authority over any proposed liquidation of community-held property or company land." Patricia Caldwell slid another document forward. "Hanover First Bank has verified all signatures, authorizations, and recorded amendments. There is no procedural defect." Bradley gave a tight laugh. "This is ridiculous. She drives a car that barely belongs in the employee lot." Olivia opened the navy folder and removed one sheet, placing it neatly on the table. Her hands did not tremble. "That car is paid for," she said. "Unlike 3 vehicles currently billed through family expense accounts without business justification." Robert Keene looked down. Vanessa's lips parted. Margaret finally turned toward Olivia, and for the first time, there was no amusement in her eyes. Olivia reached into her purse and set the old brown notebook beside the legal documents. The worn leather looked almost out of place on the polished table, but somehow it drew every eye. "Daniel and I kept records," she said. "Not to punish anyone. To protect what still deserved protection." Daniel leaned back, tired but peaceful, as if a burden he had carried for years had finally been set where it belonged. The Whitmores had spent years mistaking Olivia's quiet life for ignorance. Now, in the most expensive room they owned, they were learning that she had understood everything. Olivia did not raise her voice after the room went silent. She did not need to. The documents had done what anger never could have done. They had made every insult in that room look small beside a signature, a filing date, and a bank verification stamp. Margaret stared at the notebook as if it were a trick, but Olivia opened it gently, turning pages filled with neat handwriting, account references, employee names, scholarship codes, property notes, and dates going back years. "This is what you called old-fashioned," Olivia said. "Daniel called it accountability." Vanessa folded her arms, but she no longer looked amused. Bradley shifted in his chair, the color rising in his face as Robert Keene avoided his eyes. Olivia placed one page in front of Helen Morris, then another in front of Patricia Caldwell. For 7 years, Daniel and I lived below what people expected from us because we were trying to keep money from becoming a costume. We did not need a bigger house to prove we were safe. We did not need a newer car to prove we were successful. We did not need parties where generosity was only real if someone photographed it. Margaret's mouth tightened. Do not lecture this family about generosity. Olivia looked at her then, not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with the calm sadness of someone naming what everyone else had refused to see. Margaret, the foundation paid for 3 private dinners last year under donor outreach. The total was more than $84,000. That same month, a retired warehouse supervisor named Paul Mercer asked for $12,000 to keep his wife's medical equipment in their home. His request was delayed twice because it was not considered visible impact. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the night Olivia had found that file. She had not shouted then either. She had simply written the check from their personal account and asked Daniel how many more people had been hidden behind polite language. Olivia turned another page. Daniel and I created the Legacy Trust because we believed the company had a duty beyond the family name. It protects scholarship funding for children of employees. It prevents the sale of 3 affordable apartment buildings in New Haven without trustee review. It preserves the small business grant program your committee tried to cut because it did not improve social visibility. It also requires independent approval for personal spending charged through family entities. Bradley looked up sharply. Vanessa's bracelet slid against the table as her hand dropped from her arm. Margaret said nothing. Olivia continued, her voice steady. The envelope I placed at the country club was not a handmade note. It was a correction to the donor report. Several anonymous gifts you accepted praise for were not made from the foundation's social account. They came from Daniel's private fund. Some came from mine before I ever married him. For the first time that morning, Vanessa looked directly at Olivia without sarcasm. Yours? Olivia nodded. My grandmother left me a modest house and a disciplined investment account. I grew it quietly. Daniel respected that because he knew I did not see money as permission to become careless. Margaret glanced toward Daniel, but he was watching Olivia with the same quiet pride he had shown at the luncheon. Olivia closed the notebook and rested one hand on its worn cover. Simplicity was never a performance. It was how we stayed honest. It was how we remembered that comfort does not have to become arrogance, and wealth does not have to become noise. You thought I chose less because I did not understand more. The truth is, Daniel and I chose less for ourselves so more could survive for everyone else. No one at the table interrupted her. The skyline beyond the windows glittered in the late morning sun, all glass and height and reflection, but inside the boardroom, the most powerful thing on the table was still that old brown notebook. The first family meeting after the boardroom reveal was held 1 month later, not at the estate, not at the country club, and not beneath a chandelier chosen to make people look powerful. Olivia held it in the main conference room at Whitmore Holdings, on a Tuesday morning, with coffee in paper cups and a printed agenda placed in front of every chair. Daniel sat beside her, still pale from weeks of treatment and rest, but his eyes were clear, and his hand rested near hers on the table. Margaret entered last, as she always had, expecting the room to adjust itself around her presence. This time, no one moved. Vanessa sat quietly with a folder in her lap. Bradley avoided the chair closest to Robert Keene. Helen Morris stood near the window, calm and watchful. At the head of the table was Olivia, wearing a simple gray blazer, her old leather notebook open beside a stack of formal trust documents. Margaret looked at the chair, then at Olivia, and something in her expression changed. It was not apology. Not yet. But it was recognition. Olivia began without ceremony. She reviewed the new rules for family distributions, the independent review process for foundation spending, the limits on vehicle and travel expenses, and the permanent protections for employee scholarships and community housing. She spoke clearly, never cruelly, never raising her voice, never enjoying anyone's discomfort. That made it harder for them to dismiss her. Anger could be called bitterness. Calm authority had to be answered with facts. Bradley tried once to argue that the restrictions were humiliating for the family image. Olivia looked at him and said, "The family image will survive fewer luxury bills. It will not survive another year of confusing generosity with performance." No one laughed. Vanessa asked about the foundation dinners, but her voice had lost its usual sharpness. Olivia answered with numbers, dates, and a revised budget that moved more money into scholarships, emergency employee grants, and small business support. Margaret sat with her hands folded, listening to the woman she had once mocked for carrying an old purse. At the end of the meeting, Helen asked if there were objections to the first quarterly trust action plan. No one spoke. Daniel looked at Olivia, and the pride in his face was softer than victory. It was relief. When the documents were signed, Olivia closed the notebook and stood. Margaret remained seated. "Olivia," she said quietly, and the room seemed to pause around her voice. "I thought you lived simply because you did not know how to live well." Olivia looked at her without anger. Margaret swallowed, then continued. "I was wrong." It was not enough to erase years of condescension, but Olivia had never needed a dramatic apology to know who she was. She nodded once. "Living well is not always visible from the outside." That afternoon, Olivia and Daniel left the building together through the side entrance, away from cameras, away from anyone waiting to turn the moment into a social headline. The old silver Honda was parked between two company cars in the employee lot, exactly where Bradley had once joked it belonged. Daniel opened the passenger door for Olivia, moving slowly but smiling as the wind lifted the edge of her hair. "You know they expected you to take the mansion," he said. Olivia glanced back at the city skyline, then at the man who had trusted her before anyone else understood why. "I never wanted the mansion," she said. "I wanted the promise." They drove home to the small white Cape Cod with the blue front door, the creaking porch swing, and the kitchen table where everything important had begun. Nothing about the house looked different from the street. The same flowers lined the walkway. The same lamp glowed in the window. The same old notebook rested later that evening beside 2 mugs of tea. But everything had changed. The Whitmores no longer laughed at the car, the dress, the purse, or the quiet woman who had chosen peace over display. They had finally learned that simplicity was not emptiness. It was discipline. It was protection. It was freedom from needing the world to applaud what the heart already knew. Olivia had never been trying to look rich. She had been guarding something richer than they could measure: Daniel's trust, her own dignity, and a life built so firmly on truth that no insult could afford to touch it.